Sermons of a Buddhist Abbot. Soyen Shaku, translated by D.T. Suzuki, continues with the God conception of Buddhism. Among the many critical opinions which are passed upon Buddhism by Christian or Western scholars, there are two of which would stand out the most conspicuously and the most persistently. One of them declares that Buddhism is a religion which denies the existence of the soul, and the other that it is atheistic, or at best pantheistic, which latter term applies what is practically tantamount to the rejection of a God, that is, a personal God as believed in by the Christians. Now, just because somebody doesn't believe in a Christian idea of God doesn't mean that their belief in God isn't of a personal God, but a personal, like a human being, sort of, there's different types of ways of thinking of a personal God. The object of this discourse is to see what extent the second criticism is, if at all, justifiable. In other words, I propose here to elucidate the Buddhist conception of God. At the outset, let me state that Buddhism is not atheistic, as the term is generally understood. It has certainly a God, the highest reality and truth, through which and in which this universe exists. However, the followers of Buddhism usually avoid the term God, for it savors so much of Christianity, whose spirit is not always exactly in accord with the Buddhist interpretation of religious experience. And, we have the same sort of idea with the soul. It's not the self that most people think, the body is one of your parts. Christianity, one of the main doctrines is that body, soul, spirit. It's like, well, the body's the vessel, the mind's the vessel. Okay, there's a recommendation from D.T. Suzuki to read Dr. Paul Caruse's Buddhist story entitled Amitabha. Again, Buddhism is not pantheistic in the sense that it identifies the universe with God. On the other hand, the Buddhist God is absolute and transcendent. This world, being merely its manifestation, is necessarily fragmental and imperfect. To define more exactly the Buddhist notion of the highest being, it may be convenient to borrow the term very happily coined by a modern German scholar, panentheism, according to which God is pan-K-N, all in one, and more than the totality of existence. Just like Buddha yoga, I don't think there ever was one Buddhism. One of the most fundamental beliefs of Buddhism is that all of the multitudinous and the multifarious phenomena in the universe start from and have their being in one reality, which itself has no fixed abode, being above spatial and temporal limitations. However different and separate and irreducible things may appear to the senses, the most profound law of the human mind declares that they are all one in their hidden nature. In this world of relativity are nanantva, as the Buddhists call it, subject and object, thought and nature are separate and distinct, and as far as our sense experience goes, there is an impassable chasm between the two, which no amount of philosophizing can bridge, but the very constitution of the mind demands a unifying principle, which is an indispensable hypothesis for our conception of phenomenality, and this hypothesis is called the gate of sameness, samatha, in contradistinction to the gate of difference, nanatva. And Buddhism declares that no philosophy or religion is satisfactory which does not recognize these two gates. In some measure, the gate of sameness, may be considered to correspond to God and the gate of difference to the world of individual existence. Now the question is, how does Buddhism conceive the relation between these two entrances to the abode of supreme knowledge, Sambodhi? And the answer to this decides the Buddhist attitude towards pantheism, atheism, and whatnot. To state it more comprehensively, Buddhism recognizes the coexistence and identity of the two principles, sameness and difference. Things are many, and yet one. They are one and yet many. I am not thou, and thou art not I. And yet we are all one in essence. When one slays another, there is an actor, an act, and a sufferer, all distinct and separate, and yet, if the bread slayer thinks he slays, or if the slain thinks he is slain, they know not well the subtle ways I keep and pass and turn again. Buddhism therefore says that while we have to acknowledge the world of particulars in which individuality predominates, we must not forget that looking through the gate of sameness, all distinctions and contradictions vanish in a higher principle of unity. A Japanese poet thus sings, "Rain and hail, and ice and snow, neither like the other, so. When they melt, however low, see one stream of water flow." Intellectually, the coexistence of the two mutually excluding thoughts is impossible, for the proposition mine are not thine cannot be made at the same time as the preposition mine are thine. But here Buddhism is speaking of our inmost religious experience, which deals directly with facts and not with their more or less distorted intellectual reflections. It is, therefore, really idle to say that Buddhism is pantheistic or atheistic or nihilistic. Buddhism is not a philosophical system, though it is the most rational and intellectual religion in the world. What it proposes is to make clear facts of the deepest spiritual life and to formulate a doctrine which leads its followers to the path of inward experience. Thus, according to the proclamation of an enlightened mind, God, or the principle of sameness, is not transcendent, but immanent in the universe, and we sentient beings are manifesting the divine glory just as much as the lilies of the field. A God who, keeping aloof from his creations, sends down his words of command through specially favored personages, is rejected by Buddhists as against the constitution of human reason. Well, actually, there's variation in that sort of thing. Isn't there indication in some of the tales about Buddha that there's a couple points where he, or at least one of the Buddhas could have been one of those figures? But the Christian's going to say different, and see, that's why they're saying this. God must be in us who are made in his likeness. Well, okay, they're being like the Christians in one way and not in another. But if the Christians are going to say, "Oh, God, we're like God," rather than an image belonging to God, that's really how the Aramaic would lead you towards. But I mean, Buddhism isn't based on Aramaic text, but you know what I mean. We cannot presume the duality of God and the world. Religion is not to go to God by forsaking the world, but to find him in it. Our faith is to believe in our essential oneness with him, and not in our sensual separateness. God is in us, and we are in him. Must be made the most fundamental faith of all religion. You know, one of the aspects of people talking about the devil is that the devil is this consciousness that is, I am separate from God. And that's not what the prophet thing is about, but I can understand why Christians may have convinced people that that's what they mean. We must not, however, suppose that God is no more than the sum total of individual existences, God exists even when all creations have been destroyed and reduced to a state of chaotic barrenness. God exists externally, and He will create another universe out of the ruins of this one. To our limited intelligence, there may be a beginning and an end of the worlds, but as God surveys them, being and becoming are one self-same process. To Him nothing changes, or to state it rather paradoxically, He sees no change, whatever in all the changes we have around us. All things are absolutely quiet in their eternal cycle of birth and death, growth and decay, combination and disintegration. This universe cannot exist outside of God, but God is more than the totality of individual existences. God is here as well as there. God is not only this, but also that. As far as He is manifested in nature and mind, they glorify Him. And we can have a glimpse of His image and feel, however imperfectly, His inner life. Well, we can understand how qualities are known, but not quite the essence, but combining qualities, you realize, But it will be a grievous error, let us repeat, to think that He has exhausted His being in the manifestation of this universe, that He is absolutely identical with His creations. Again, an image belonging to, not, we being like God. And that with the annihilation of the world, He vanishes into eternal emptiness. There is a favorite saying in Buddhism which declares that the sameness without difference is sameness wrongly conceived, while difference without sameness is difference wrongly conceived. To express this in Christian terms, God, not in the world, is a false God, and the world not in God is unreality. All things return to one, and one operates in all things, may in one, and one in many. This is the Buddhist conception of God and the world. Billows and waves and ripples, all surging, swelling and ebbing, and yet are they not so many different motions of the eternally self-same body of water? The moon is serenely shining up in the sky, and she is alone in all the heavens and on the entire earth. But when she mirrors herself in the brilliant whiteness of the evening dews, which appear like glittering pearls broadcast upon the earth from the hand of a fairy, how wondrously numerous her images! And is not every one of them complete in its own fashion? This is the way in which an enlightened mind contemplates God and the world. God is immanent in this world and not outside of it. Therefore, when we comprehend the secret of the little flower in the crannied wall, we know the reason of this universe. Reason is the inner life of all beings. It is the subjectivity of existence. It is the quickening spirit of all creation. It is a realization of our finite minds of an infinite divinity. When we know ourselves, we know heaven and earth, we know God, we know everything and anything. We know His presence even in the most insignificant flower in the field, which is trampled underfoot by men and beasts, carelessly and piteously, to say nothing about the starry heavens, with their grandeur, which is replete with suggestions, or about the huge mass of inert matter on which mountains rise, oceans roar, and sentient beings walk. When we come to realize this mysterious presence of the highest reason in all things, we are struck with the fact, and there arise mingled feelings of awe, admiration, and helplessness, which latter is strangely tinged with a sense of self-exaltation. We are awe-stricken because it is beyond our human intelligence to grasp thoroughly the scheme of God. We admire it because of the wonderful beauty and harmony which are traceable in every step of His, though our imperfect minds are sometimes set up against almost insurmountable difficulties, and the reconciliation of contraries and opposites, we feel helpless because our fragmentary consciousness is unable to review the entire range of divine operation, and thus to know the why of all these things through the recognition of divinity in us lifts us up above the wearisome condemnation piled upon humanity by some moralists and religionists. Guilt, shame, and fear are certainly strong things that we all need to deal with, but let's not having thus expounded the Buddhist conception of God and his relation to us, I wish to proceed to explain some terms which are generally used by Buddhists to designate the highest being in its various modes and phases. As I mentioned before, Buddhists do not make use of the term God, which characteristically belongs to Christian terminology. An equivalent most commonly used is Dharmakaya, which word has been explained in one of the sermons herein collected, and it will not be necessary to enter again upon the discussion of its signification. Let us only see what other equivalents have been adopted. When the Dharmakaya is most concretely conceived, it becomes the Buddha, the Tathagata, or Vairochana, or Amitabha. Buddha means the enlightened, and this may be understood to correspond to God is wisdom. Vairochana is coming from the sun, and Amitabha, infinite light, which reminds us of the Christian of the Christian notion, God is light. As to the correct meaning of Tathagata, Buddhists do not give any definitive and satisfactory explanation, and it is usually considered to be the combination of Tatha, thus, and Gata, gone. But it is difficult to find out how thus gone came to be an appellation of the Supreme Being. There are some scholars, however, who understand Gata in the sense of being in or situated in. If this be correct, Tathagata, meaning being thus or being such, can be interpreted in the same sense as Tathata or Bhutatthata or Tattva, as explained below. But in this case, Tathagata will lose its personification and become a metaphysical term like the others, though it has been so persistently used by Buddhists in connection with the historical Buddha that it always awakens in their minds something more concrete and personal than a mere ontological abstraction. Now, some of this we can connect to the Jainas and the Jain path, as people like to pronounce it nowadays. Talks about the Tirthankaras, or the bridge builders, and various things. A lot of paths talk about how the names of God are, well, I guess some mystics will tattoo themselves and all that, but it's like in the Bible when they talk about on the hand and on the forehead and on the doorpost and on your gate. And you don't actually have to have the scripture written there, but some people are going to do that rather than, oh, this law is being followed. And I'm reminded of the creed in these various things of this person or these people. Buddhism, so we're manifesting the qualities, basically. Buddhism is the most speculative of all the existing religions in the world, and abounds with many high abstract terms, which may sound empty to ordinary minds. Among them we have such words as Tathata, or Tattva, Buddha, Tathata, Buddha Koti, Trunyata, Alakshatam, Nirvana, etc. These are all philosophical terms for Dharmakaya to explain tathata or tathata or tattva or suchness or being such, and Buddhist scholars assert that, strictly speaking, these terms alone rightly designate the nature of the highest reality when we speak of its absolute transcendentiality. People are liable to take it for an empty nothing, while if we state that it is eternally true and real, they may consider it something concrete and particular. To avoid such extremes, or rather to synthesize them, the term suchness has been coined, but in reality all human efforts are altogether insufficient to express the true nature of the ultimate, says Achvarosha. The immortal existence is absolutely beyond intellectual demonstrability, but we as rational beings need some words to express ourselves, and for that purpose the term suchness has been selected. Disposing of all others, the words in which Goethe makes Faust utter his feeling concerning God may here be quoted as also corroborating Achvarosha's conception of suchness. Who dare express him, and who profess him, saying, I believe in him? Who, feeling, seeing, deny this being, saying, I believe him not? The all-enfolding, the all-upholding, folds and upholds, he not, the me himself. Vast as it is, fill with that force thy heart, and when thou in the feeling wholly blessed art, call it then what thou wilt, call it bliss, heart, love, God. I have no name to give it. Feeling is all in all. The name is sound and smoke, obscuring heaven's clear glow. When even this tathva is found inadequate for certain purposes, Buddhists add Buddha, really there too, and coin the word Buddha tathata, which means that which really exists as such. Suchness, being an abstract term, may breed some misconception when the term is used alone on the part of the uninitiated. To avoid this, reality has been prefixed, which proposes to make it clear that the ultimate reason is not an abstraction, not a mere subjective creation, but a real objective, or rather transcendental existence. Buddha Koti serves the same end, as it means the highest point of reality, or the real end of things. Alakshatam, Chunyata, and Nirvanam express the negative phase of Dharmakaya. When affirmation alone is not sufficient, we frequently resort to the negative way of defining things, showing thereby at least what they are not. The human mind cannot have a positively adequate conception of things which are beyond the realm of conditionality, for it is bound up within spatial and temporal relations, and in order to give expression to these non-conditional objects, we use the negative method and say that they are not such and such. In innumerable ways, this negation is as effective in defining things as affirmation. When Buddhists assert that the Dharmakaya is Chunya, empty, or alakshana, devoid of particular marks, or nirvana, emancipating, or nachava, faultless, they are following the inevitable course of meditation. All these and some other negative terms, unfortunately, have caused a great deal of misunderstanding on the part of unsympathetic critics, who have either forgotten or ignored the peculiar proclivity of human reasoning to one-sidedness and exclusiveness. Lastly, Paramartha and Satya are the terms used to designate the epistemological phase of the Dharmakaya. Paramartha is the first or highest reason, and Satya is truth, or that which truly is. And for the psychological aspect of the Dharmakaya are, as it is manifested in the human consciousness, Vibhuti Hridaya. Bodhi is the divine wisdom incarnated in our limited intelligence, or the divine love as reflected in our human sympathy and compassion. Well, we kind of see this sort of thought in the Christian thing, in how the Christ is rather than the meaning of a secondary thing, just like Bodhi kind of does mean a secondary meaning rather than a god. Bodhi is incarnated in our limited intelligence. Our love is reflected in our human sympathy and compassion. Hridaya is the inner life of existence, which prompts and quickens us to do the will of the Dharmakaya, and which is awakened to its fullest dignity and glory when intelligence passes over the limits of relativity, the reason why we are able to have an insight into the nature of the ultimate being and to recognize the truth that sameness and difference are coexistent and really identical is because our Bodhi, our Hridaya, is essentially one with the Dharmakaya. When the Bodhi comes to know itself, it also knows the inner being of Dharmakaya, however fragmentary the knowledge be, and we lie blissfully at rest in the bosom of eternal motherliness. So we can definitely think of Bodhi and Hridaya as our own aspects rather than something we worship. But it's our own aspects that remind us of divinity.